At the shareholders' meeting, Marcus sat confidently smiling beside his mistress, while his mother mocked Diane openly. Then she took the microphone. 3 years watching you cheat. 3 years buying every stock you sold. $5 billion later, I own you all. The lawyer nodded quietly. Controls shifted immediately. Let me tell you about a woman named Diane, a woman the world thought was simple, quiet, harmless, the kind of woman people look past without a second thought. But see, the quietest people in the room are often the most dangerous. And Diane? She was about to prove that in the most devastating way possible. It started on a Sunday evening at Marcus's mother's house. You know the type of house I'm talking about. The kind with marble floors and crystal chandeliers where everything is just a little too perfect, a little too expensive. Marcus had brought Diane to one of his mother's famous family dinners, the kind where everyone dressed to impress and pretended they liked each other more than they actually did. Diane walked in wearing a simple navy dress, nothing fancy, hair pulled back in a neat bun. She carried a glass dish covered in foil, homemade cornbread she'd spent the afternoon making. It was her grandmother's recipe, the kind of food that came from love, not money. But when she set it on the counter, Marcus's mother, Lorraine, barely glanced at it. The woman was tall, elegant, draped in expensive jewelry that caught the light every time she moved. She smiled at Diane, but it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Oh, sweetheart," Lorraine said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We have professional catering tonight, but it's sweet you tried." She pushed Diane's cornbread to the side like it was something that might contaminate the rest of the food. The kitchen staff pretended not to notice, but Diane saw the pity in their eyes. She'd seen it before, many times. The dining room was filled with Marcus's family, aunts, uncles, cousins, business associates, everyone important in his world. Diane took her seat at the long mahogany table, and immediately she felt it. The weight of judgment, the silent dismissal. She was the odd one out, and everybody knew it. Marcus sat at the head of the table, laughing loudly with his younger brother Trevor. Both men wore expensive suits, gold watches flashing on their wrists. They looked like success, smelled like money. Trevor leaned over and said something that made Marcus throw his head back in laughter, and neither one of them looked Diane's way. The servers brought out course after course, fancy food with French names that Diane recognized but never ordered for herself. She ate quietly, answering politely when someone bothered to speak to her, which wasn't often. Most of the conversation swirled around business deals and vacation homes and people Diane had never met. Then Lorraine stood up with a wine glass in her hand, tapping it gently with a silver spoon. The room went quiet. "I just want to say how proud I am of my son," she began, her eyes on Marcus, building his company from the ground up, making smart decisions, surrounding himself with people who understand vision and ambition. Her gaze swept across the table, landing on everyone except Diane. That's what separates the successful from the ordinary, knowing who belongs in your inner circle. The table murmured approval. Marcus nodded, accepting the praise like it was oxygen. Trevor raised his glass. "To my big brother, the smartest man I know." Diane kept her eyes on her plate. She'd learned over the years that silence was safer than speaking. Anything she said would be picked apart later, analyzed, found wanting, so she stayed quiet. But then Marcus's cousin, a woman named Brielle, who wore too much perfume and not enough humility, leaned across the table and said in a voice just loud enough for everyone to hear, "I still don't understand how Marcus ended up with someone so simple." "No offense, Diane." The words hung in the air like smoke. Diane looked up slowly. Brielle was smiling, pretending the insult was a compliment. Others at the table shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. This was the game they played, cruelty disguised as concern. Trevor jumped in, grinning like this was all good fun. Yeah, big bro could have had anyone. Investment banker, lawyer, model, but he chose the quiet librarian type. He winked at Marcus. Guess you got a good heart, huh? Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. Didn't defend his wife. Didn't shut down the mockery. He just shrugged and said, Diane's got a good heart. That's what matters, right? Wrong answer. But Diane didn't flinch, didn't cry, didn't argue. She just took a sip of water and let them have their moment, because she knew something they didn't. Something that would make this dinner look like a bad joke one day. Lorraine seized the moment. She always did. A good heart doesn't run a company, Marcus. Your father, God rest his soul, built an empire because he married a woman who matched his ambition. You need a partner who understands business, not someone who spends all day reading books. Diane's fingers tightened around her fork, but her face remained calm, neutral. She'd practiced this expression in the mirror for months, the art of looking unaffected while your soul was screaming. The dinner continued. Dessert came and went. Coffee was served. And through it all, Diane sat quietly in her simple navy dress, her grandmother's cornbread still sitting untouched on the kitchen counter, while Marcus's family laughed and talked around her like she was furniture. Harmless, boring, invisible. But invisibility, Diane had learned, was a superpower. When people don't see you, they don't watch you. And when they don't watch you, they don't know what you're building in the shadows. A week later, Marcus threw a company party. His tech firm had just closed a major deal, some contract worth millions that he'd been chasing for months. The celebration was at his headquarters, a sleek glass building downtown, with views of the city skyline. Champagne flowed like water. Executives in expensive suits congratulated each other, clinking glasses and making toasts. Diane arrived late. She'd spent an hour trying to find something to wear that wouldn't make her feel out of place, eventually settling on a simple black dress. Nothing designer, nothing flashy, just clean and appropriate. When she walked into the party, nobody noticed. The music was loud, the laughter louder. Marcus was surrounded by a crowd of admirers, and he hadn't even looked toward the door. Diane stood near the entrance, clutching her small purse, wondering if she should just leave. But then a voice cut through the noise, smooth, confident, female. You must be the wife. Diane turned to see a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Tall, stunning, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Diane's car payment. Her skin glowed. Her makeup was flawless. Everything about her screamed expensive. This was Simone. She extended a perfectly manicured hand, nails painted deep burgundy. I've heard so much about you, Simone said, her smile bright but her eyes cold. There was something predatory in the way she looked at Diane, like a cat sizing up a mouse. Diane shook her hand. Nice to meet you. Oh, the pleasure's mine. I'm Simone. I handle Marcus's West Coast accounts. We work very closely together. The way she said closely made Diane's stomach turn. This wasn't just a colleague. This was competition, a threat, the other woman. Marcus appeared then, sliding through the crowd with a drink in each hand. He saw Simone first, his whole face lighting up. There you are, I got you that wine you like. He handed her a glass, his fingers lingering on hers just a second too long. Then he noticed Diane standing there. Oh, babe, you made it. Babe. The word sounded hollow, like something he said out of habit, not affection. Yeah, Diane said quietly. Wouldn't miss it. Marcus barely looked at her. He was already turning back to Simone, laughing at something she'd whispered. Diane watched them move through the party together, Marcus's hand occasionally brushing Simone's lower back. Simone leaning in close to talk over the music, the two of them orbiting each other like planets pulled by gravity. Diane found a corner and stayed there. She held a glass of water while everyone else drank champagne. She watched. She observed. She saw the way Simone touched Marcus's arm when she laughed, saw the way he looked at her, the way he used to look at Diane years ago, saw the way nobody introduced her to anyone important. She was the wife, the accessory, the woman who didn't matter. An older colleague, a kind-faced man named Mr. Patterson, eventually found her in the corner. "You all right, honey?" he asked gently. Diane nodded. "I'm fine. Just observing." Observing. Everything, she said, and she meant it. She was watching her husband fall in love with another woman in real time, watching him become someone she didn't recognize, watching her marriage dissolve in a room full of people who didn't know her name. The party went until midnight. Marcus never introduced her to the executives, never brought her into conversations, never checked on her. When they finally left, Simone was the last person he said goodbye to. A long hug, a whispered promise to call tomorrow. In the car ride home, Diane sat in silence. Marcus drove, humming along to the radio, completely oblivious. Or maybe he just didn't care. When they got home, Marcus went straight to his office. Diane heard him on the phone almost immediately. She walked quietly down the hallway, stopping just outside the cracked door. She didn't mean to eavesdrop. Or maybe she did. Either way, she stood there and listened. Mom's right, Simone. I should have married someone like you, someone who understands ambition." Simone's laugh echoed through the speaker, sharp and knowing. "Well, you're stuck with her for now, unless what? Unless you grow some courage." Marcus sighed, long, heavy, defeated. "She's harmless. She won't even notice." Diane's hand gripped the doorframe so tight her knuckles went white. Harmless. That's what he thought, that she was too stupid, too naive, too simple to see what was happening right in front of her face. She didn't burst in, didn't scream, didn't cry. She just turned around and walked to the guest bedroom, the room where she'd been sleeping for the past 4 months. Marcus hadn't even asked why she'd moved, hadn't noticed, or cared. On the nightstand sat a small leather notebook, worn, brown, filled with years of handwriting, her father's notebook, the one he'd given her when she turned 18. On the first page, in his careful script, were the words that had guided her entire life. "Smart money moves in silence, baby girl." Diane sat on the bed and opened her laptop, logged into her private investment account, the one Marcus didn't know about, didn't know existed. The screen loaded, and there it was, $847 million, nearly $1 billion, earned quietly over 10 years through careful stock trading, real estate investments, tech startups that nobody else believed in yet. Nobody knew. Not Marcus, not his mother, not Trevor or Brielle or any of them. She'd built an empire in complete silence while they mocked her for reading too many books. Diane stared at the number on the screen. Then she looked at the notebook, then back at the screen. And for the first time in months, she smiled. It was cold, calculated, the smile of someone who just realized they held all the power. 3 years, she whispered to herself. I'll give him 3 years to show me who he really is, and then I'll show him who I've always been. She opened a new browser tab and started researching Marcus's company. Stock prices, shareholders, quarterly reports, vulnerabilities. She would need a plan, a careful one, the kind her father would be proud of, because smart money doesn't just move in silence. It strikes when nobody's watching. But before we get to that, you need to understand where Diane came from, because this story doesn't start with betrayal. It starts with a little girl in rural Georgia watching her father turn nothing into something. Diane grew up in a small town outside Atlanta, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody and money was always tight. Her father, Leonard, worked as a janitor at a satellite office for a big Wall Street firm. Every night he came home with newspapers, annual reports, documents that executives had thrown in the trash. While other men came home and watched TV, Leonard spread those papers across the kitchen table and read. They throw away gold, Diane, he used to say, his reading glasses perched on his nose, pen in hand. While they talk on phones and play golf, I read what they leave behind. Leonard taught himself investing. Started with $500, turned it into $50,000 over 20 years, paid for Diane's college education, gave her opportunities he never had, and every step of the way, he taught her everything he knew. "You're smarter than all of them, baby girl," he'd tell her, while they studied stock charts together at that old kitchen table. "But the world won't see it because you're quiet, because you're a black woman who doesn't shout. Use that. Let them underestimate you. It's the greatest advantage you'll ever have." When Diane turned 18 and left for college, Leonard gave her that leather notebook. "Write down every move," he said. "Every investment, every lesson. Smart money moves in silence, and you're the smartest person I know." Diane went to college and studied finance, graduated top of her class, got a job as a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm. That's where she met Marcus. He came in for a business consultation, young and ambitious, full of big ideas and bigger dreams. He was handsome, confident, the kind of man who walked into a room and made people pay attention. During the meeting, Marcus presented his business plan to a room full of analysts. Everyone nodded along, impressed. But when it was Diane's turn to speak, she didn't nod. "Your projections are optimistic," she said calmly, her voice steady and professional. "You're overvaluing assets and underestimating operational costs. If you move forward with this model, you'll be insolvent within 18 months. The room went quiet. Marcus stared at her, his jaw tight. Nobody challenged him like that. Nobody had the nerve. But Diane wasn't being rude, she was being honest. And after the initial shock wore off, Marcus realized she was right. He asked her to coffee afterward, then dinner, then a dozen more dinners. They dated for a year, and during that time, Marcus loved her intelligence, called her my secret weapon, brought her to meetings and valued her opinion. He made her feel seen, important, loved. They got married in a small ceremony, simple, meaningful, just family and close friends. Diane wore her grandmother's wedding dress, and Marcus promised to love her forever, and for a while, he did. But then they moved into Marcus's world, his mother's world, the world of country clubs and charity galas and people who measured worth by the size of your house and the brand of your car. Lorraine took one look at Diane and decided she wasn't good enough. Too quiet, too plain, not the kind of wife a successful CEO should have. And slowly, Marcus started listening, started pulling away, started seeing Diane through his mother's eyes instead of his own. The woman he'd called his secret weapon became the woman he was embarrassed to introduce. The brilliant analyst became the boring housewife who didn't understand business. 2 years ago, Leonard died. Heart attack. Sudden. Devastating. Diane held his hand in the hospital while he took his last breaths, and the last thing he said to her was this: "Promise me something. Never let anyone make you small. You have a gift. Use it." She promised. And that night, alone in the grief of losing the only person who truly saw her, Diane made her first major investment, $200,000 from her inheritance, into emerging tech stocks. Within 6 months, it doubled, then doubled again. She kept trading, kept investing, quietly, while Marcus slept beside her, back when he still slept beside her, while he worked late with Simone, while he stopped asking about her day, stopped caring about her thoughts, stopped seeing her at all. She built an empire in complete silence. The notebook became her Bible. Every stock purchase, every real estate acquisition, every calculated move. She wrote it all down, just like her father taught her. And Marcus never noticed, never asked about the laptop she worked on late at night, never questioned why she was always reading financial news. He assumed she was reading novels, Harmless fiction for a harmless woman. Now we jump forward. Year 1 of Diane's silent plan. The affair had started. She knew because she wasn't stupid. She saw the signs. Late meetings that smelled like perfume. Text messages Marcus hid. Business trips that didn't match his calendar. She hired a private investigator, got photos, Marcus and Simone, hotels, weekend conferences that had nothing to do with business. Instead of confronting him, Diane did something smarter. She checked Marcus's company stock prices. They were dropping slightly due to poor management decisions he was making, too distracted by his affair to run the business properly. That's when Diane started buying. Small amounts at first. Through shell companies, anonymous purchases, 2% ownership, then 5, then 8. Nobody noticed. The purchases were too small, too scattered across different entities, but they were adding up. Year 2. Family cruelty deepened. Lorraine hosted one of her famous charity galas, the kind where rich people donated money to feel good about themselves. Diane was forced to attend. Marcus insisted, said it would look bad if she didn't show up. But when they arrived, Lorraine seated Diane at a back table with the event staff's families, not with the VIPs, not with the donors, with the help. Marcus sat at the front table with Simone beside him. They laughed together, his hand resting casually on her lower back. Lorraine gave a speech about vision and success, and surrounding yourself with excellence. When she said the word excellence, she looked directly at Simone, not at Diane. The room applauded. Diane excused herself and went to the bathroom, stood in front of the mirror and stared at her reflection. She looked tired, older, worn down by 3 years of emotional abuse disguised as marriage. But her eyes were clear, focused. She pulled out her phone and texted her financial advisor. Buy another 10% of Marcus's company, whatever the cost. Year 3. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Marcus came home drunk. Simone had dropped him off in her expensive car, and Diane watched from the window as they kissed goodbye. Long, passionate, the kind of kiss that said everything about where his heart really was. Marcus stumbled into the house and somehow found his way to the guest bedroom where Diane sat reading. He leaned against the doorframe, eyes unfocused, words slurring. "You know what your problem is?" he said. Diane closed her book, waited. "You're boring. You're plain. You don't challenge me anymore." She looked at him, really looked at him. This man she'd loved, this man she'd built a life with, this stranger. "I never stopped challenging you, Marcus," she said quietly. "You stopped listening." He laughed, mean, bitter. "God, even your comebacks are boring." He left, slammed the door so hard the frame shook. Diane sat there in the silence, and something inside her finally broke. Not her spirit, her patience. She'd given him 3 years. 3 years to prove he was the man she married. 3 years to choose her. He'd failed every single test. She opened the leather notebook, went through the pages slowly, counted everything she'd accumulated. 47% ownership in Marcus's company, purchased anonymously through 12 different shell corporations. The mortgage on their house, bought from the bank when Marcus refinanced without reading the fine print. Simone's credit card debt, $340,000 across 7 cards, purchased from a collections agency for pennies on the dollar. And when she added it all up, her total net worth had reached $5.2 billion. Diane closed the notebook, looked at her wedding ring, the simple silver band Marcus had given her 8 years ago, promising it was temporary until he could afford better. He'd been able to afford better for years. He just never bothered. She slid the ring off her finger, set it on the nightstand, and whispered to herself, 3 years. Time's up. Marcus had called an emergency shareholders meeting. He was planning to sell 30% of his company to a private equity firm. The deal would make him richer, give him the freedom to divorce Diane and marry Simone publicly. He'd been planning it for months, and Diane knew every detail because his lawyers were sloppy with paperwork and her investigators were thorough. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. The boardroom filled with investors, board members, lawyers. Lorraine was there, dressed in designer everything, holding court like the queen she thought she was. Trevor sat beside her, scrolling through his phone, bored already. And Simone sat at the executive table next to Marcus, pretending to take notes, but really just sitting there like she owned the place. Diane arrived quietly, wore a simple gray suit, hair in a neat bun, no makeup, no jewelry except a pair of pearl earrings her grandmother had given her. She looked exactly like what they thought she was, harmless, boring, out of place. Lorraine saw her first, leaned over to Trevor and whispered, loud enough for people nearby to hear, "Why is she even here?" Marcus didn't acknowledge Diane, didn't look her way. He was too focused on his presentation, too excited about his big deal. The meeting started. Marcus stood at the head of the conference table, clicked through slides, talked about growth and profit margins and shareholder value. "This deal will secure our future," he said, his voice confident and strong. "Increase shareholder value by 40%. I've worked 3 years for this moment." The room applauded. Board members nodded. Everything was going according to Marcus's plan, until the lead lawyer stood up. His name was Mr. Hutchinson, an older black man with silver hair and glasses, the kind of lawyer who didn't waste words. "Before we vote," Mr. Hutchinson said, his voice cutting through the applause, "there's been a development. A majority shareholder has emerged. They've requested to address the board." Marcus frowned. "Who?" Mr. Hutchinson looked directly at Diane. The room followed his gaze. Diane stood slowly, every eye in that boardroom locked on her. She walked to the front of the room, footsteps quiet on the expensive carpet, and stood at the microphone. Marcus was staring at her like she'd lost her mind. "Babe," he said, forcing a laugh, "what are you doing?" Diane didn't answer him. She faced the room, faced all the people who'd dismissed her, mocked her, treated her like she was invisible. And when she spoke, her voice was calm, steady, powerful. "My name is Diane. Most of you know me as Marcus's quiet wife, the one who doesn't talk much, the one who isn't ambitious enough, the one who doesn't understand business." The silence in that room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. 3 years ago," Diane continued, "I watched my husband cheat on me. I watched his mother mock me at family dinners. I watched his mistress sit in my seat at company events. I stayed silent, but I wasn't idle." She clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up with spreadsheets, stock purchases, transaction dates, dollar amounts, everything documented, everything legal. Every time Marcus sold shares to fund his lifestyle, I bought them anonymously through shell corporations registered in 3 different states. Over 3 years, I acquired 51% ownership of this company. As of this morning, I am the majority shareholder and acting CEO. The room exploded. Gasps, shocked whispers. Marcus went white as a ghost. He grabbed the table for support like his legs might give out. "That's impossible," he stammered. "You don't have that kind of money. You can't—" "It's public record," Diane said calmly. "My lawyers filed the paperwork this morning. Everything is legal. Everything is verified." Lorraine shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is a joke. You don't have that kind of money. You're a nobody." Diane turned to face her mother-in-law, the woman who'd spent years making her feel small. "I have $5 billion, Lorraine, earned through investments you called boring reading. My father was a janitor who taught himself the stock market. He taught me everything he knew, and while you were busy judging me for being quiet, I was busy buying your son's entire world." Lorraine's mouth opened and closed like a fish. No words came out. Diane turned to Simone next. The mistress looked terrified, her perfect makeup unable to hide the panic in her eyes. "And Simone," Diane said, her voice almost gentle, "about that credit card debt you've been hiding, $340,000 across 7 different cards. I know because I bought the debt from collections agencies 3 months ago. You don't owe Capital One anymore. You owe me, directly." Simone's face drained of all color. She looked like she might faint. Marcus slammed his fist on the table. "You can't do this! We're married! This is—" "Legal," Mr. Hutchinson interrupted, standing. "I've reviewed all documentation. Everything Mrs. Diane has done is completely legal. The share purchases were executed properly. The debt acquisition was processed through legitimate channels. And as of this morning, she also executed a clause in your mortgage. When you refinanced the house 2 years ago, the bank sold the mortgage to an investment firm. That firm is owned by Mrs. Diane. She owns your house, your cars, your assets." Marcus looked like he might throw up. "This can't be happening." Diane clicked the remote again. The screen changed. Now it showed property deeds, car titles, bank statements, everything Marcus thought he owned. Everything that was actually hers now. "You called me boring," Diane said, looking at Marcus with eyes that held no anger, just cold fact. "Simple. Harmless. You were right about one thing. I am simple. I simply outplayed you." She clicked the remote one more time. Security personnel entered the boardroom, 4 of them, professional, quiet, effective. "This meeting is adjourned," Diane said. "Marcus, Simone, you are both terminated effective immediately. Severance packages will be mailed to your addresses. Security will escort you from the building. You have 10 minutes to clear your personal items from your offices." Marcus stood there shaking. "Diane, baby, please. We can talk about this. We can work this out. I made mistakes, but—" "We had 3 years to talk, Marcus. You chose silence. You chose her. You chose your mother's approval over your wife's dignity. Now I choose consequences." Lorraine rushed forward, her face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" Diane held up a hand. Security stepped between them. "Careful, Lorraine. Your son's trust fund? He used it as collateral for a failed investment last year. That collateral is now mine. You're welcome to contest it in court, but my lawyers are excellent, very expensive, and very patient." Security took Marcus's arm. He didn't resist. Just stared at Diane like he was seeing a ghost. Simone was crying, mascara running down her face, but nobody cared. Trevor had gone completely silent, pretending he didn't know anyone in the room. They led Marcus and Simone out. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Lorraine stood frozen, her mouth hanging open, all her elegance gone. She looked old suddenly, defeated. Diane turned to the remaining board members, smiled softly, professionally. "Now," she said, her voice businesslike and calm, "let's talk about restructuring this company properly. I have some ideas about ethical leadership and profit sharing that I think you'll find interesting." Within 48 hours, Marcus's life completely collapsed. His office access was revoked. His company car was repossessed. His penthouse apartment, the one he'd rented to impress Simone, had the locks changed. His bank accounts were frozen pending divorce proceedings. And Simone? She blocked his number and disappeared, unwilling to deal with her debt or his drama. Marcus showed up at his mother's house with 2 suitcases and a broken spirit. Lorraine let him in, but not kindly. "How could you let this happen?" she screamed at him. "How did you not know your own wife was that rich, that smart?" "I didn't know," Marcus yelled back. "She never showed any sign of what? Intelligence, ambition, vision?" Lorraine's voice was bitter poison. "I told you to marry someone powerful. someone who matched your status. You chose weak, and look what happened. This is your failure, Marcus, yours." She kicked him out that same night. Couldn't bear the embarrassment of having a failed son under her roof. Marcus ended up in a cheap motel, staring at the ceiling, wondering how his life had fallen apart so completely. Simone tried to run, packed her bags, and headed to Los Angeles, thinking she could start over. But Diane's lawyers were faster. They caught her at the airport, served her papers right there at the gate. "You have two options," the lawyer explained calmly. "Pay the $340,000 in full within 30 days, or enter a structured payment plan supervised by Mrs. Diane's financial team. Interest rate is 12% annually." Simone broke down right there in the terminal. The glamorous life she'd built on credit cards and other women's husbands came crashing down. She moved back to her hometown, got 2 jobs, and started making monthly payments that would take her 15 years to finish. Lorraine tried to rally family support, called a big family meeting, tried to turn everyone against Diane. But Diane's lawyers showed up with documents proving Lorraine's charity foundation had been mismanaging funds for years, using donations for personal expenses, designer clothes, vacation homes, all of it illegal. "Mrs. Diane is willing to overlook these discrepancies," the lawyer said politely, "if you agree to never contact her or Marcus again. Otherwise, these documents go to the IRS tomorrow morning." Lorraine signed the agreement without a word. Her pride was destroyed, her reputation in shambles, and Trevor. He wanted nothing to do with any of it. "This is Marcus's problem," he said, blocking his brother's calls. "I barely know Diane anyway." 6 months later, Diane sat in her new office. Marcus's old corner office, completely redesigned. She'd gotten rid of the heavy dark furniture, the ego wall covered in awards, all the trappings of false success. Now the space was minimal, elegant, filled with plants and natural light. Windows overlooking the city she now owned a significant piece of. The company was thriving under her leadership. She'd restructured everything: fair wages, profit sharing for employees, ethical business practices. The stock price had risen 60%. Investors who doubted her at first were now calling her a genius. Employees who'd barely noticed her before now respected her completely. On her desk sat her father's leather notebook, open to the last page. In Diane's handwriting were new words: "Smart money moves in silence, but when it speaks, everyone listens." Dad was right. One afternoon, security called her office. "Mrs. Diane, there's a Marcus here to see you. Should we send him away?" Diane thought about it, then said, "No, I'll come down." She met him in the lobby. Glass walls, public space, neutral ground. Marcus looked broken. Older than his years, tired. He'd lost weight. His suit was wrinkled. The confidence that used to define him was completely gone. "I just need 5 minutes," he said quietly. "Please." They stood facing each other. People walked past, going about their business, unaware they were witnessing the final chapter of a failed marriage. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, his voice cracked. "I was a fool. I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me." Diane nodded. "You did? Is there any chance, any possibility that we could—" "No." The word hung between them, final, absolute. Marcus swallowed hard. "I loved you. I still—" "You loved who you thought I was," Diane interrupted. "The quiet woman who wouldn't challenge you, who'd make you feel big. But I was never that woman, Marcus. I was always more. You just refused to see it. I see it now. Now doesn't matter. You had 8 years to see me. You chose blindness, silence, long and painful." "What do I do now?" Marcus asked, and he sounded like a lost child. Diane looked at him one last time, felt a flicker of something, not love, but maybe pity, maybe just closure. "What I did," she said. Rebuild quietly, learn humility, find out who you are without your mother's voice in your head telling you what success looks like. She turned and walked toward the elevator. Marcus called after her. Diane. She didn't turn around, just kept walking. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, and as they closed, she saw Marcus still standing there, broken, alone, facing the consequences of his choices. One quiet Saturday, Diane drove back to Georgia, to the small cemetery where her father was buried. She brought fresh flowers, sunflowers, his favorite, sat on the grass beside his headstone and let the peace of the place wash over her. "I did it, Daddy," she said softly. "Just like you taught me. Smart money, silent moves. They never saw me coming." She placed the leather notebook on the grave temporarily. "Thank you for seeing me when the world didn't, for teaching me my worth, for showing me that being quiet doesn't mean being weak." A breeze moved through the trees, warm, gentle, like an answer. She picked up the notebook, stood, brushed grass from her jeans. Time to teach someone else now. Pass it forward, that's what you would have wanted. 1 year after the shareholders' meeting, Diane launched something new. A mentorship program for young women from underprivileged backgrounds, teaching them financial literacy, investment strategies, but more than that, teaching them their worth. She stood before a classroom of 20 young black women, all of them eager, hungry, brilliant in ways the world hadn't noticed yet. "The world will try to make you small," Diane told them. "Quiet, invisible. Let them. While they underestimate you, build empires they'll never see coming." The young women leaned forward, soaking up every word. "Your power isn't in being loud," Diane continued. "It's in being smart, calculated, patient. Let them mock you today, own them tomorrow. Never mistake silence for weakness. My father taught me that. Now I'm teaching you." She opened the leather notebook, the same one that had guided her through the darkest 3 years of her life, the same one that had helped her turn pain into power. "Now," Diane said, smiling at the future sitting in front of her, "let me teach you what my father taught me, how to move in silence and strike like thunder." The room erupted in applause. These young women, these future billionaires, these overlooked geniuses, these silent warriors, they understood. And Diane knew her father would be proud. "I'll see you in the next one. Stay powerful."